just the journey. Make sure this is right. Arlington Martin, TCU, Missouri, UCF, Eastern Illinois, New Mexico State, Mississippi State.
Yes, and hopefully that is it for moving for a long time.
I just was playing because I love the game. And it's scary to me.
It's really easy for the game to become a job.
Low six in his hands, whistle in his mouth.
Man, kids out there playing the game, staying out of trouble, competing. I love it.
For those that don't know, former teammate, big time SEC Division I coach has decided to join us, and we are greatly appreciative. Clifton Odom of Arlington Martin lore, Baylor letter winner, class of 07. So thank you. Welcome to the Quick Six. We appreciate it, as I know that your schedule is absolutely hectic, especially in season. So we appreciate you sitting down and talk with us. If you want, just kind of fast track the intro, and we'll get all the formalities out of the way, and then we can just kind of talk ball and talk coaching.
Perfect. Sounds good, man. Shit, I appreciate it. When you text, I was like, absolutely. I've watched a few of these, man. So anything I do, just to spread everything you guys got going on. Obviously, I have a bunch of respect for both you guys, man. So whatever I can do to help, man, I want to do so. And shoot, Travis, we go way back. You know, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and some deep, dark secrets. So yes, I will do whatever I can to help.
Much appreciated.
So in high school, wanted to be a football coach or a GM, wanted to be around the game. College, thought I was going to NFL. That dream was short-lived or not lived at all. And then I look up, I have a degree from Baylor, and I have an opportunity to work at a Boys and Girls Club, be an assistant manager at GNC, or be a manager at a Nike store in Uptown Dallas, assistant manager at Nike store Uptown Dallas. Get all the interviews, get all these jobs. And I decided to say no, don't make any money, move back home with my parents and my brother, who's a junior in high school, and work for free and coach at my high school, Martin, with Coach Wager and the rest of the staff that came in my senior year. And it was the best decision I ever made in my life. Even though I was making no money, living at home, I got a chance to be around the men who shaped me and my high school career. And the way they brought me into the profession, I wouldn't take it, wouldn't change it for anything. And then from there, GA'd at TCU under Coach Patterson. I mean, it's his defensive mind. I had no idea there was this depth into one, football, but then two, specifically defense, and then even more so secondary. Learned a lot there. Then GA'd at Mizzou from under Greg Brown and Damani Cross, who was at TCU. That was my connection. And then Greg Brown, he was one of two coaches for the longest time to coach two Jim Thorpe Award winners. So learned a lot just from cornerback play from him. Then at 1AA Stetson, and then UCF, and then Eastern Illinois, then New Mexico State. And one thing that people usually like hear that and see that, they're like, oh my God, this guy bounces around from job to job, all this. Well, one piece that is not on a resume or a piece of paper is my wife, Brittany. We were college sweethearts, broke up, got back together. She was on the track to being a doctor, so med school at KU Med, which is why Missouri happened, and because I knew I was going to propose. And then why Stetson happened is we were engaged, about to get married, and I just needed to find a way to get to Florida. Why Florida? For her and her dreams, because she supported me. And I knew once I proposed, it was my job to support her as best I can. She had a choice to make in residency. So it's like sorority match, where you go through a bunch of interviews across the country to find your residency program. You rank all the places you interview one, and then they rank all the people that they interview one. Well, she gets a call. Johns Hopkins is just opened up a new pediatric residential program in St. Petersburg, Florida. And the original plan was to never leave TCU, for her to match UT Southwestern in Dallas. We already bought a condo in Arlington. I go to Fort Worth, she go to Dallas. That's what we're doing. But when Johns Hopkins called, the number one pediatric residency program in the country, or at least top 3, she kind of asked me, what should we do? And in my heart, I was like, I can't hold her back, especially with us being young. I go, we'll figure it out, because I already made the decision because we're engaged. And so I said, you need to put them one if you love it. They love it. And before she left her interview, or right after, they said that they were going to rank her one. I was like, okay. cool. So then I have to figure out to be closer to her. And I know that's not like the best advice, but I wasn't going to sacrifice my relationship with her at all. And we're going to make it work. And if that was distance, it was going to be distance. So that's one thing that's it's not on my resume, but like I want people to know and understand too. I wanted to make sure that I found a way to be close to my fiance and then wife. And Lord willing, and because I think of that choice, everything ultimately ended up working out in the end for us. But that's a big piece of like, as you look at it, the jumps kind of don't make sense. But from a personal level, that's why I wasn't going to sacrifice our relationship.
Well, and I think that leads to, something that Trent and I have touched on very lightly before, but, and I think it's something that's more on my radar now after this past year and a half, but like you can't do this job. You can't stay in this profession consistently without like an all-in coach's wife and understanding that, like, I think that it's a huge piece that the give and take and the ability to say, I'll be fine. I can find a job and I can coach ball, but this season is about you. I think is huge, because then when you call and you're like, okay, now we have to go move. We're moving to New Mexico. Those conversations are easier. So taking that into consideration, I mean, TK can speak on it too from the year that when they came back to the Metroplex, but similar to my season right now is that there's got to be some clear and obvious give and take, or you're going to burn that candle at both ends, and it's not going to be sustainable.
100%. And like that, the conversation you said about New Mexico literally happened. It was Eastern Illinois. I'd been GA and been at Stetson, and then we finally get to move. So we were married for 2.5 years, living across the state of Florida from each other. And then we finally moved and lived together. Even though we dated in college, we lived together for the first time, being married for 2 years. And I was in my second year as an analyst at UCF. And after being an analyst for 2 years, I was like, look, if I really want to do this, I have to get back on the field as a position coach. I had connection with the guy I ironically GA'd with at Mizzou and Neil Renna. They had an opening at Eastern Illinois, and I looked her in the eye one night and I was like, I said exactly that. I said, if I'm going to go do this, I have to go take this job. I have to go get this job and take this and go be on the field. She didn't bat an eye, and she said, yes, well, then you said this and you're convicted, then let's go. And so that's exactly it. I really think I don't think it would have been as clean or as clear for her if we didn't do that on the front end, to where she got to go and fulfill her dream at the highest possible level in residency at becoming a pediatrician. If she didn't do that, I don't think the Eastern Illinois move, because Orlando, Florida and Charleston, Illinois are a little different, especially you add in COVID. But I really don't think that all happens if we didn't make that decision together on the front. I was like, no, you go to Florida and we'll figure it out and we're going to be fine regardless of the circumstances or situation.
TK, what about like, what were y'all's conversations, you and Lauren, like that transitional period from? So, Cliff, if you don't know, Trenton met his wife like the third day that he was at Lipscomb the first time, and they fast tracked it. It was like 9 months. They got married, but then after 2 seasons there, he came back and was the OC at McKinney.
Yep.
TK, just through, what was y'all's experience like through that move and whatnot? Because you had to spend. I mean, she was pregnant, and you were down here for what, the first like 3-4 months?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing, especially in this industry, there are so many coaches that, where they're getting divorced or whatever it may be, and it's because all they do is just take and they take and they take and then think, well, because I'm a coach, like, that's how my wife's supposed to be. Like, she's got to commit to me and everything that I do, she's got to commit to. It's like, no, dude, like at the end of the day, and you're the perfect example of it, like you got to give some. And so whenever I took the job at McKinney, I left here. We were there for not even a year, and I could just tell it would have been best for us, our family, our kids at the time, just one, to come back here. And so that's when I started making the calls, not knowing what I was going to do. At the time, it was like, hey, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go be a GA here. I'm going to go be a high school coach here. And then it just worked out that obviously I got the job at Vanderbilt. But again, to your point, it's priorities of a relationship over priorities over coaching. And I think it's so long that you keep it that way, your relationship will always stay intact, and then the jobs will just follow as they come.
100%. Absolutely. And I remember me and you, we didn't, I don't think we got too deep into it, TK, but I remember recruiting at McKinney and I remember us talking a little bit about that and you experienced that too. And we kind of talked about my journey a little bit as well. And I think you have that at the forefront because like football is extremely important. It's what we love. It is our passion. But there are just a handful of things in faith and family come before that. And I think holding on to those two, I think you do that and truly prioritize that first, and then it's football. I think everything, like you just said, falls into place. And for me, especially, it really has.
Yeah.
So-
Well, I'll say this too, I have so much respect for you, Cliff, just because. So whenever I was at McKinney and then I found out I was getting the job, I texted honestly a handful of people that were in the college world, and I just wanted advice. And you were one of them, where I was just like, hey, in your opinion, what's the best way for me transitioning from high school to college to have success? There's only a few people that I want to hear that feedback from, and you're one of them. And I remember your advice was like, hey man, at the end of the day, they're just older high school kids, and treat them the same way and make sure you're all having fun. It is more of a business to make sure you're still having fun. And that was something that I took to heart, and I thought about you all the time when I got to Vanderbilt. It was like, as much of a business as it is, because you're in that environment, and it's such a different environment, obviously than high school, that it's so easy to forget. Like, man, these are kids. They're just wanting to have, not the same experience as high school, but a different experience. It has to be fun, and it has to be about the user experience. So I appreciate you with that, man.
Of course, brother.
There's two things there, right? Like one thing that everybody needs to know is that, Cliff and I have had a lot of teammates that have entered the coaching ranks, whether it be high school or college. And the one thing that I can always say about Cliff is that I know without a shadow of a doubt, I'm going to hear back. It may not be in 5 minutes, but he's always been the same person he was in 2007 and 2024, like the same person I met the first time I walked in to that moldy, grimy locker room of Floyd Casey. And I've always appreciated that. But Trenton's question and reaching out, I think, is something to expand on. Like your time at Martin, and then boom, jump Big 12, TCU. What was the biggest like transitional piece making that jump? And then what did you take from Martin that you felt like helped you once you got to Fort Worth?
Okay, so the interesting piece about Martin is I get to Martin, it's week 2, and Coach Weger literally sees me in the stands at my brother's JV game. He's a 6'4", 225-pound junior who's on JV, who ended up playing in NFL. But we were living at home. I had no job. He was like, hey, come volunteer. I volunteer. And I was like, yep, this is what I want to do. And then from that point, once I made that decision, I was never leaving Martin. Wasn't even thinking about it. I barely knew what a GA was. Like, because in college, unless you're trying to pay attention to like the coaching rankings and everything, because you want to be a coach, you're not really paying attention. You just see, okay, this is a guy in the meetings and he's a coach. And so one thing that helped me to kind of start to realize what that was throughout my time at Martin was the recruitment of Myles Garrett. And you have all these coaches going around and trying to find an angle and stuff. And I was never going to leave Martin. I was with my dad was my first coach, the most influential man in my life, the best man that I know. The second is Bob Wager. So I was with my high school coach who came in and changed my life and allowed me to earn a scholarship at Baylor, because I don't do that if he doesn't come in my senior year. With the coaching staff, the core of that coaching staff was still there at Martin. And so I get to work with them and coach with them every single day. There's no reason for me to leave. Wasn't ever thinking about leaving. So I was just falling into the standard that they set. They coached hard. They were up there all the time. They worked out in the morning or at lunch. They worked out with the players. We were there all summer, and I loved every bit of it. Never took a vacation. I never felt like I needed to, because I was with family every single day working. And so what changed and how it changed was happenstance. There was a coach on our staff who came in Jake Brown, and we were together 2 weeks in the summer, and he he was in transitioning from moving, and he had a big old, I'll never forget, this silver truck with the trailer on it. And we were in between summer workouts, or excuse me, it was right after summer workouts. And he was about to move all this stuff right outside of Fort Worth by himself with his wife and dog. And I was like, Jake, let me help you. And he was like, no, man, I got it. You know, we're as coaches, we get really stubborn and hard-headed. I go, no,
baby.
Jake, let me help you. And he says, no. So I just followed him to his truck. Like I just hopped in his truck and he didn't say anything. And so really that was kind of the transformative moment. He was eventually wanting to and was expecting to get a job at TCU as a GA after this season. I didn't know that. He just needed a buffer season because whatever happened in between. And so he tells me this. He was like, Cliff, I'm telling you, you're a college coach. I see your juice, your energy, whatever. And I was like, oh man, I appreciate it, man. That's cool for you. That's awesome. And then let's just have fun. Well, fast forward out that season, he ends up coaching the D-line. Now, mind you, he won a state championship at Ennis, is an offensive guy, played at Tech, at North Texas. I think was Baker Mayfield's coach at Lake Travis, and then was supposed to be at TCU. Something happened, so he ends up coaching at Martin. So I think in 2 seasons, he coached Baker Mayfield at Lake Travis and then Myles Garrett. So there, talk about that, being able to coach me, coach, you just find a way. But really, it was that conversation that kind of opened my eyes. But then he leaves after the season and he GAs at TCU for a year and I'm still at Martin. And so he keeps telling me, Cliff, I'm telling you something's going to open. I'm going to stand on the table for you. I was like, okay, cool. Not saying I didn't believe him, but I just didn't know. And so come to find out after that following season, they have an opening and Jake was like, I told you, dude, like I put your name on for this GA job at TCU. What do you think? And I was like, I never really thought about it, but okay. Then it got real when he was like, okay, Coach Patterson wants to meet you. Now, I had a very small relationship with Coach Patterson because Coach Wager did an amazing job. Anytime he spoke with any college coaches, he always brought me along. Whether it was him speaking at Notre Dame, I was always one of the coaches that went to, whether it was Notre Dame, whether it was TCU, whether it was SMU, whether it was North Texas, he always brought me along with him. So we knew each other, and then he recruited me briefly out of high school. And so we meet, me and Brittany's there, and it was just a tour. And he was like, is this something that you want to do? And I said, yeah, I want to think about it. And Brittany goes, yeah, I think we're ready to join the family. And I was like, okay, well, we didn't really talk about that. But then that's how it happened. And so I know that's not like, it wasn't like this strict, I had this like note card is where it said 5-year goals is going to be this. It just, I think it was like I coached as hard as I could. And I had people in my corner, and that's how the opportunity at TCU happened. And so for anyone that's listening, I think for me, taking a big step back and looking at it, being where your feet are and doing the best you can at where you're at, and things are going to happen like they're supposed to. I think that's the biggest thing I take away. And then the second thing I take away is why I'm as best I can. I'm always going to try and be the guy who, if we have a connection or a relationship, I'm going to reach out or do whatever I can to help, because I've had so many people and so many men look out for me. And I don't take that for granted, and I don't lose sight of that. And if it's not for Coach Wager, and if it's really not for Jake Brown staying on the table for me, I don't even get this opportunity. And I think that's a big piece of it too, is it's so easy to be solely driven by your goals and your dreams. You have to help people along the way. I am a product of people who have helped me along the way. And speaking about me, I guess, without me even being around or having any idea those conversations were happening. So I think that's 2 things. One is it's going to take someone to pull you up, but 2, it's also going to make sure that like when you're in a job, be in that job. And because at the end of the day, we're there for kids. We're in a service industry. We're in a service business, and our life is to pour into kids however you can. And it's through the game of football. And you do that at the best you can, things will work out how they're supposed to. And it's probably not going to be on your timeline, but I think that those are 2 things I take away that I do not forget. And I try and think about as much as I can, if not every day.
Yeah, I think that's, the not on your timeline. That's a huge one. But that was a hard lesson, I think, that I had to learn when I got out of, my coaching bubble. The year in Stephenville was one that people don't believe sometimes when I tell them, but you learn a lot. You learn what you want to do. You learn what you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then spending over 8 years in one place when I was at Salina,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it's just you get used to the day to day, and you get used to, you know, this is the process, and then we're gonna do this, and then, you know, when the season does come to an end, we're gonna reset, and we just kind of start new. And leaving and coming out here and doing as a head coach, you immediately have to put on your conscience that, like you said, you got to be where your feet are.
Yes.
Because if you're doing this for that, then you're never going to get off the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a huge thing that everybody's got to take away. One funny story from when you were at Martin, I don't know if you remember this, but he briefly mentioned that Myles Garrett was on the team when he was at Martin. Well, Trenton and I are at Tarleton, and I'm helping the defensive staff with recruiting. And I reach out and I was like, hey, I need to talk to you about a kid. And Cliff, I think, knew that I was at a Division II. And he was like, you saw the news article, didn't you? I was like, what are you talking about? Well, apparently the day that I had decided to text him, and it was like a DB, some corner or something that like we felt like we might have an outside shot at, that was getting a little under recruited. The day that I had reached out to him, the Star Telegram had written this like huge article about how I don't even know what year he was, but how NFL scouts were projecting that he could start for an NFL team right now as a high schooler. And I was like, no, definitely not calling up that kid comes Tarleton. But hey, I mean, I appreciate you thinking that we're on that playing field.
Hey, take your shot, man.
So I know that you've been obviously a few different places. The main thing I want to know, you know, we're going through right now here at Lipscomb, you're going to go through those tough seasons. Just talk about, you know, your highest of highs. Where were you at where you had maybe one of your most memorable seasons, and then your lowest of lows where maybe you were going through more of a grinder of a season? Just kind of talk about that journey, what you pulled out of it, and, you know, stuff like that.
Oh man, highs of highs for sure. 2018 UCF. That team, it was so cool because that's kind of that connection in that season is going to lead to a lot of connections that I'm currently having now. So you have Coach Hype, Josh Heupel, who ironically enough was an OC at Mizzou when I GA'd at Mizzou. So that connection helped me get there. Then you have Coach Leb, who obviously were connected because of Waco and him being a GA, and then coming back recruiting Martin, then getting a chance to see me coach. And then that team, those players, you have Mackenzie Milton, you have all these guys who had just went from, I think they went 1-11 a couple years before, and then they went undefeated in 17 and beat Auburn and come back, and we run the table again in 2018. And the leaders, the picture that painted for me was, at the end of the day, it's about the players. That was a player-led team. They knew exactly how to push each other. There were so many times in 2018. Now, mind you, we're a first-year staff. And so usually when you come in as a first-year staff, you're rebuilding and redoing and breaking all these old habits, which there was still some stuff there that we had to do that. But for the most part, the winning culture was there. And the players upheld that standard, and they got on each other and they pushed each other. And one thing, it wasn't perfect off the field and all this other stuff. When it came between being in the white lines, they played their butts off. And that was probably the most eye-opening thing for me, especially being off the field, was having more of a bird's eye view of watching how those players operated. And so for me, I was like, okay, I'm going to put this in my back pocket, in the back of my mind of, you need to push players to have that, to push them on the forefront, to be leaders and push each other's. And that's when, going in maybe fall camp, like you have something special. I had no idea because I hadn't really been a part of that at that level. But once I realized, okay, this team's different because they are different. They have deep-rooted connections. They had shared suffering from previous years. They had just come off another season and they wanted to push themselves. And so that was the coolest experience, to go undefeated, and then LSU, playing LSU in the Fiesta Bowl. That bowl game was unbelievable. The hit on Joe Burrow, ironically, the D lineman Joey Connors who hit him is our analyst, special teams analyst here at Mississippi State, who was with me at New Mexico State, and he kind of changed Joe Burrow's career. I'd like to think, but that year was unbelievable. And just you look up and you have Coach Hype, who we have a relationship. You have Coach Leb, and then all these other connections. There's a couple guys I GA'd with at Missouri who are at UCF, and there's a lot of coaches I would say 5 coaches from that staff on or off the field are now all here at Mississippi State. So that's what's really, really cool. Going to lowest of lows. I would like lowest of lows. Maybe Eastern. In Eastern, it wasn't. It was a lot of. We did lose quite a bit, but it was COVID and losing in 2020, and the first time me and Brittany are moving and buying a house, and COVID happens, and she is in the medical industry, so she had to stay in Orlando for 6 months, and I'm in the middle of Illinois by myself during COVID, and then our season gets canceled, and then we play a spring season, then turned into a fall season. So that was probably the lowest of lows, and that wasn't because of the players or the coaches or anything, but the circumstances of everyone who was going through it during 2020 and COVID and all that. And so those were probably the highest of highs and lowest of lows. Was that 2020 into 2021. Man, it was just like rib shot after rib shot after rib shot. And it was my first time ever not being in a season during the fall. It was the weirdest, wildest thing. And oh, by the way, I'm wearing a mask and we're doing all this, and then we don't get to play football. So it was that was eye-opening, but also I think too, just like you have seasons of life, just like you have seasons in football where it's ebbs and flow and it never is consistently high. And so there's just a lot of things to reflect and take on and look back and take from, after the fact. But like everybody else in the world, we were no different. But man, that was brutal.
Yeah.
So
I bet it was.
touching on that, because I think it's something that I don't want to say all coaches, but the vast majority of coaches, you hear the old adage is like bad teams, don't listen to have no leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Good teams are coach led, and great teams are player led. Like,
yep,
some variation of that has been said to every team ever. But after seeing it at UCF and like I've been able, my first year at Sideline, I got to witness it like immediately walk in the door, and one of the coaches was like, "Listen, man, teach them some little bit of this, little bit of that about playing receiver, but like just make sure they get on the bus. Like these kids know what the heck they're doing," and they did. Like we essentially cakewalk to the state championship game.
Yep.
But how do you, since 2018, how do you implement that, or how do you instill that in your kids outside of being like, hey man, you got to be a leader and you've got to understand that they're going to be more apt to do great if it comes from you? Like what have you instilled as a coach outside of just, the talking and the dialogue?
I think as a position coach, it is within the room getting guys to challenge each other. Asking questions, like I'll just pair it to here in the specialist room, is asking them or making sure that they're asking each other like, hey, what were you thinking here? What was your setup? What was your angle? To where that dialogue is happening. Now I'm kind of cultivating that dialogue, but then pushing them to have that conversation away from here. Because that's when, yes, it was like we may have interactions. You played receiver, I played DB. We have interactions in the locker room. But the real juice of a team is away from the facility and how you interact and how you talk about ball. And if you're just talking about ball in the facility, 9 times out of 10, you're probably not going to have that culture of all this winning and success. So I try and foster it in the meeting room and then tell them, okay, push it a step further and have real relationships that then talk, when you talk about ball and you're getting on each other's asses a little bit, that it's coming from a place because you have a relationship, but too, it shouldn't just be in the building. It shouldn't be in the meeting room. It needs to be when you're hanging out, playing the game, going to dinner, doing whatever. Talk about how you can guys push each other. And it's okay if someone has some critique for you. If it's your teammate, it's warranted. It's coming from some piece of truth that they see. You can take it personal, but it's more so about how you respond to it. And I think that's the biggest piece, is trying to cultivate and push them to have conversations and real conversations and being truth tellers to each other. I think that's the biggest thing that I've tried to always, since 2018, like you said, with UCF, is try to cultivate that to where they can be comfortable having tough conversations with each other away from the facility. I think that's a huge piece as far as building leadership, because that 2018 team at UCF hung out with each other all the time. And it was just a football team, and they rocked with each other. You could have kids that were from Florida, from Atlanta, from this place, from that place, receivers, DBs, linebackers. They all rocked with each other. And you could tell that as they laugh or joke, they would be on each other's heads about something that happened outside of the building, but also about football as well. And so that's something I've tried to push and cultivate. I think it starts as a position coach in the meeting room.
So slight transition, we've been talking about your coaching career. I want to revisit, these are always fun for me. I want to revisit the playing days and that locker room.
Oh Lord.
But same question, just, other side of the white line, right? Like, walk people through your highest of high and your lowest of low as a player. Like, even if it was in high school and not even in Waco, like, even though we came in at the same time, Cliff did not redshirt. I was a lowly walk-on. I took full advantage of that redshirt year. But Cliff was on the field as a true freshman. And so the opportunities for some of those highs and lows came a year earlier. Mm-hmm. But just kind of walk them through the other side of that coin as a player.
So my lowest of lows was in 2008, really my sophomore year, where, like you said, I played as a true freshman with Coach Morris and the staff. They recruited me, and I was supposed to, now you'll never believe this, but this is what I was told. Maybe not true, but it was what I was told. I'm going to be the next step, a kick returner for the next X amount of years. It was checked in to be a starting corner, not given to me, but like that's where the real line, and I can see the vision and trajectory that they painted. New coaching staff, Coach Brosnan comes in, and the new strength staff with Coach Cos, and they're like, Odom, you have stiff hips and flat feet. It was the first time I was ever told that. And then now looking back at it as a corner, that ain't good.
I didn't know if those flat feet were going to come up.
Yeah, no doubt. And so I was like, this is the first time I'm told athletically I'm not quite good enough. And so I went from playing as a true freshman to my lowest of low was in 2008, we were playing at Oklahoma State, and I don't make the travel squad. And that was the first time I was really ever told in my life, you're not good enough. And so that was eye-opening. And it was, I remember went to the state fair. Brittany came with me and my parents, and I was just like, I don't like this. I can't, I could, like, they're all having a good time going to the fair and eating all this stuff. And I was pissed. I was mad. I was like, something ain't right about this at all. And that led to a change in me, because I've always prided myself in being one of the, as a player, hardest workers. And I was going to be at the front of every conditioning and all that stuff. But that made me realize, okay, what you were programmed to do was not good enough. It wasn't good enough. Just because you were probably one of the fastest, one of the strongest, doesn't mean you're going to be a good football player. And so I had to flip a switch in me and dig deeper and find something else to work harder. And like, okay, you're going to say I have flat hips flat feet and stiff hips. I'm going to live in the weight room, in the training room, to offset that. I'm going to do extra to find my way onto the field. And so that leads into, that happens. I start a few games at my junior year, and then my senior year get hurt the week before the first game, earn a starting spot at TCU, get voted as a captain. High ankle sprain. I get hurt against TCU, but I fight my way back and come back early in the highs. The highs was, ironically, the place we just left yesterday was beating Texas at Texas our senior year. That was the highest of highs, because for us, and Travis, I know you know this, with that 07 class, the reason why I chose Baylor on my official visit, we came in and said, we are going to a bowl game. Because at that time, when we came in 07, it had been like 13 years. And by the time our senior year, 16 years since Baylor went to a bowl. We're like, we are going to be the class that first goes to one. And we beat K-State to get to 6 wins. And we were like, this isn't good enough. We're not going to just be a barely get in 6-win team. Texas had just made their stadium 100,000. We were going to Texas. They had this guy, that guy. And we're like, no, we are going to go to Texas and win in Austin for what may have been like the 17th time since Baylor and UT had been playing. And that was the highest of highs for me, was in that locker room and getting that with the boys, because being a senior and being with our class, Travis, like that meant the most to me. That's probably the biggest win of my playing career, because I looked around that locker room and it was us and it was our boys that we came in together with. And that meant the most to me. And personally, the journey of not traveling in 08, and then in 2010, we finally got to, not finish the job, but like have a huge check mark that we set out 3 years prior. And so for me, those are two probably, lowest of lows and the highest of highs for me as a player.
Yeah, that Texas game, that one of my favorite pictures from my time in Waco is that picture at the end of the game where it's you, me, Nick, John, Corbell, and Coach Souter, in his windbreaker, like getting to take that horns down picture on that field, because I distinctly remember, and my perception of like 2007 totally different than yours because of you were playing as a true freshman. You were heavily recruited by these guys. I got a late conversation of like, hey, show up when school starts, like yada. And so not even being like a camp invite to a PWO, just having like this fringe connection, and like I just got to take full advantage of whatever I get. It almost seemed like, as much as we wanted to make a bowl game, it seemed like, okay, we're gonna make a bowl game, but like Texas, that's like a different level, because they were 2 years removed from Vince and the national championship. Colt McCoy is like the winningest quarterback in college football history at that point. And they seemed almost like an untouchable. Even the year before, when they went to the national championship in 09, it just seemed like that was almost an unclimbable mountain. And then to do it, and the feeling that we had standing on that field after it was over and we didn't even play that great. It was, like a 10 or 11 point win, but the ability to handle some of the things that we did, and being able to take that picture at the end was, that was football cloud 9 for me. Like, that's the inescapable feeling, despite the fact that Chalky Brown made me feel like an 11-year-old child on one play.
Yes.
Because the week before, when we played K-State, Coach Babers was the kickoff return guy. And every other coach was like, that's the only reason McLean's on this is because Babers is coach. And I was like, you're probably right, but you know what? I'm going to pester him until I get on the field. Like, it's going to happen.
Doubt.
And
absolutely.
And so K-State had their starting nickel. I can't remember his name. He was like 5'8", $180. It was the first guy I was ever going to block that was my size or a little bit smaller. And we put a kill on. And so I come flying across the field, and I earhole this dude like the greatest block I've ever thrown in my life. And so going into the Texas game, I'm feeling like, I got this down.
I'm here. Yeah, I got my role.
And they had 2 starters as the safeties on that thing, and one of them was Chalky Brown. And I come running across, and he is standing like straight up and down, like so annoyed that he has to be on kickoff. And I think like, oh, I'm about to make a statement. Like, this is going to be massive. Like, this boy's about to feel me. And I put everything that I had to it, and he like flicks his shoulder. And I don't know what happens. I just end up on my back looking up, and he looks down at me and in more colorful words says, "Don't ever try something like that again." And I was like, you got it.
Yes, sir.
And so we went back to like shielding and like body blocking. But that was like, K-State, I'm up here thinking like I'm rolling with the big boys. Like, this weight room work is finally paying off to, a future NFL corner being like, no, just do your job. Don't try and do any more than who you are.
Yeah.
Yes. That Texas game was huge. It was huge for our class, but it was huge for the program too, because
no doubt,
as you guys that all played as true freshmen graduated and went on, and I was able, me, Nick, and John, and some of those guys were able to kind of see those things build one more step. That's when I got to see the things like you were just talking about with UCF in 18 is guys are taking ownership of those conversations, and Coach Browse was so like, he was such a master in his creativity to motivate.
Oh my goodness.
And like the conversation that we don't know about as players, but like later on, you find out the conversation he had with G-Way, like going into that year about what it's going to take. Like, hey man, this is what your job's supposed to look like, but this is what you're playing like. Or then fast forward to 2012 when like the rumored story about like him telling Nick that he needs to grow a beard because of what it's going to do to like his ability to lead and guys like follow his path. And like just things like that, getting to see those things come to fruition paired with, the confidence that's been built from our ability to win 7 games, those are those are that's why I love these conversations, is because those are the things that everybody else doesn't get to see.
No doubt. No doubt. And just in the coolest thing for me is like going back when we were coming out of high school is you guys know this, like it was always wearing UT and A&M stuff. When you were around in high school, it was all your buddies. And like my high school was a little weird because there's more tech stuff because a lot of people went to tech. Never Baylor, not really TCU. Then I come back as a high school coach. As many kids in high school wearing A&M and UT stuff, they're wearing Baylor stuff now. They're wearing TCU stuff, and it speaks to a little bit of our class, but then what you guys did in 11 and Griff win the Heisman, and so like the those kids don't know that about us. They see Griff, but like the guys that are in the arena know that, and so like that's something I carry a huge amount of pride with that nobody can ever take away from us, man. So like I think that's why we could sit there and go months or times without talking with each other, but as soon as we talk, it's right back because of what we're able to build, man. So I think that's that's one of the coolest things from a player standpoint, and we try to remind them all the time of, like Leb says this all the time to the players here, you're living in the good old days. You don't know it yet, but you are truly living in the good old days. So embrace them and appreciate them. Even when things aren't going the way you thought or you want, you're in it right now. And you're building a foundation for friendships and relationships for the rest of your life.
And I think that one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that those rebuilds, those teams that like those guys that are on teams that are in the valley, but they stick it out and they rebuild and they have those successful seasons and they accomplish like major things, not just 7 wins, but they go win 8, 9, 10 games. And those teams, they produce more coaches than
That's real.
The dynasties. Like,
that's real.
No disrespect, but early 2000s USC and current Alabama isn't producing the number of coaches that 08 to 2015 Baylor or 17, 18, 19 UCF. They're not producing them because their experiences they don't have that Valley experience. And I think that Valley experience being implanted in you is what makes a guy go, I got to make sure the next generation gets this feeling.
100%. It is funny that you say that. I never thought of it like that, but like it's a subconscious thing too. I think. I think that because you understand as a coach, like you could work in a 25, 30, 40 year career and only have 5 opportunities to win a championship, whatever level. But it's like, yes, those championship seasons, you enjoy them and then you fight your butt off and you do whatever you can to win. But then like the meat of who you are is a builder in the valleys and try and be a steady in a valley for your players. And it's funny, I never thought about that, but that's so true. 100% that's so true, is because as a player, we experience that. And so like when you make that decision to be a coach, you want to give that back of like, look, I've been here before. I've literally been here before. It's like, okay, cool. I wish I would have responded this way. So let me tell you about my experience and let me help you get through to the other side, because there's good on the other side of this. Expect like what we're experiencing right now. Just trying to remind our players, be disappointed, be pissed off, be this. Real feelings. Be disappointed. But there is good on the other side of this storm. We've lived it. We are living proof of that. So that's what's cool. I've never made that connection. That's so real though, Travis.
Trenton, I mean, Tarleton had to be that way when you got there too. I mean, because your last year we win the Lone Star Conference, but what were freshman and sophomore year like?
Yeah, I mean, it was the same thing. I mean, it was the constant reminder to the kids, and honestly, us as coaches too, of like, this is what it takes. Like, if you want to do it the long, hard way to have longevity at the very end of it, this is what it's going to take. And I think it's that way with everybody. Kind of pivoting, Cliff, talk about New Mexico State. So like when I was leaving Vanderbilt, Coach Beck and some of that staff started transitioning back into Vanderbilt. So I've heard some stories. Talk about, the change that took place there in New Mexico State. Obviously, Coach Kill's the mastermind behind all of that, but just talk about, what happened in order for that change to happen. What did he do? What are some things you took away from him that you'll take for the rest of your life and your coaching career?
So Jerry Kill is like the OG of OGs. He has this uncanny ability. It is in him. God put this in him to where he is a leader of men and more specifically of young people. He would wear his jeans, his cowboy boots, a cup of coffee, and his hat, and have his beard, and would sit there and yell and scream. Sometimes sit there, put his arm around him, and whisper. The kids immediately gravitated towards him. The ones that there was a few people would assume a bunch left. Not that many left that first year or that first off season. He has this just uncanny ability, God given gift to speak to young people, motivate young people, and gravitate them to come together. He pushed them. And then from an administration standpoint, and I don't know all this, but he just pushed and pushed and pushed because of where all the places he had been to be like, no, you want to sit there and really you want to go to this level? I'm going to push every single person. I don't care if you are the equipment person to the athletic director or whomever. I'm going to push us to the places that I've seen and where we all need to go. And so he was at the forefront, and he truly worked tirelessly for these kids in every aspect to get them everything to the best possible ability that you can at New Mexico State, to give them the best of the absolute best that they could receive. And so it was really him. And then I think a great thing that I'm sure was very intentional by him, if you look at the staff from top to bottom, it definitely, at least the 10 coaches, it was our shot to be a Division I coach. So like our chip was a boulder on our shoulder to go prove ourselves. And so we all brought that every single day. And it was starting with his leadership, but you have a rock star, Nate Dreiling, who is now the head coach at Utah State, who's an unbelievable defensive mind, who just the opportunity hadn't been there yet. And he gets that. You have Tim Beck, who is a winning head coach, who is a brilliant offensive mind, gets his opportunity. And you go to Melvin Rice, who played for Coach Kill. You go to you go to Chuka, you go to Bobby McMillan, who was at TCU, you go to all these guys who are on that staff. And it was our opportunity to finally get a Division I job. We'd all been at 1AA or Division II for the most of our careers, or analysts or whatever it may be. So I think his leadership and him pushing, but then all for us individually, we had to go prove ourselves, and we wanted to go prove ourselves because we understood it was our shot. And so I think another thing that he did that I will take with me, if Lord willing, if things work out to ever be a head coach, is he embedded himself in the community. In Las Cruces, New Mexico, he was going to restaurants. He was going to, I'm saying bars, but like he was going out where the people are and where they hung out at. And he was available to where he instantly became a rock star, because I don't know anything prior to that, but I guess the previous head coaches weren't like that. He would wear the poncho to games, and he embedded them in the Las Cruces community so they could feel him. He wanted to produce a team that represented the community. And I think that's one important piece that I'd never thought of, because whether it's Fort Worth or Orlando, you kind of take that for granted of the culture of the community. Las Cruces is very specific, and they're blue collar, hardworking people, which is who he is. So it was a natural fit. It wasn't forced, but he wanted to show them respect, and by going and being where they were at, so they could have buy-in as well. And so I think it was the first time they truly felt a community around the football team, because they felt it from the head coach. And he made sure that he said, no, go out to eat with your family at all the restaurants everyone goes to. Tell them that you're a football coach. Invite them to the game. So the community support was there too. And so I think that was something that maybe isn't as impactful on the forefront when you think about being a head coach, as, pushing administration and getting the right players in. But I thought that was probably one thing that probably pushed us over the edge, especially that first year, was he made sure that he embedded himself in the community. And so once people got to talk to him, he's from Kansas, but because he's exactly who he was and told it like it is and didn't change, but also wanted to embody who they were, they felt a connection with him. And so I thought that was genius in rebuilding that program. And I think, too, he pushed everybody so much that the players were like, okay, I just need to listen to this man. I just need to listen to this man. It's going to hurt. It's going to suck. It's going to be frustrating at times, but he's going to sit there and push us to win. And we did. And I think a changing moment was 2022. Our backs against the wall. We had to beat Liberty to even have an outside shot to get to a bowl game. And we did. And then you look up the next year, we beat Auburn at Auburn to get 10 wins, which hadn't been done back-to-back bowl games in a long time at New Mexico State. But Coach Kill's a catalyst, man. And the way he pushed and the way he embedded himself in the community are two things that I will always take with me. I'm forever indebted with him to him because he gave me a shot. I mean, I was coming from Eastern Illinois, and he gave me an opportunity to be my first Division I coaching job, man. And so I can't speak more highly about him and what he's done. He's a rock star, always has been, always will be.
Do you think that was intentional? The makeup of that staff?
Knowing him, I think so. I think so. If the core of that staff was some like Tim and Tim Beck go way back. Mm-hmm. They go back to Pitt State. So he got a bunch of people around him that were cut from the same cloth. And like through that, you have the same thing with Nate Dreiling, who was a hell of a player at Pitt State and a four-time All-American. So he had that at the core. And then you look at it, it was guys who was with at TCU who he knew, who he trusted, who had seen in action. And then I had a TCU connection. A couple other guys who may not have worked with them had some sort of connection, so he knew exactly who he was getting. And he was getting guys who had a chip on their shoulder, who knew that who knew that this was their opportunity, our opportunity to go prove ourselves that we can do it at that level.
Absolutely. Well, this show has started to transition the way that it ends, and you being a father, albeit, but how old is yours?
He will be 9 months in a couple of days.
Okay, so you're still in like the quote unquote honeymoon phase, like he's
that what we call this? Okay, all right.
Oh yeah, it's all once they become a toddler, it's a wrap. It's so over. And so what I started doing is sharing some of the escapades of our middle child. Her name is Parker, and she is feral. She's a wild animal.
Yes.
And so Chronicles of Parker have quickly become some people's favorite part of this. But this past week, my wife called and shared with me that it was a late night. I think it was the night that I was at Fields of Faith on Wednesday. But Kelly's getting him ready for bed, and Cal, he's pretty simple. Give him a bottle, he passes out, easy peasy. Parker, you kind of have to like negotiate with and like sit her in the right spot or whatever. But they're sitting there getting ready for bed. Kelly's sitting on the bed with her, and she kind of leans back and yawns really big, and Parker freaks out and starts screaming and bawling. Kelly's like, oh my gosh, what's wrong? She's like, Mama, you're going to eat me. And for the next 15 minutes, all she told her anytime that she like yawned or anything was like, no, Mom, please don't eat me. And so not really sure what that means. But it is a positive sign that imaginative thoughts like that are taking over for the farting on command. That was a big hit a couple weeks ago. So those are the things that you have to look forward to.
Can't wait.
So
I can't wait.
Well, he is the special teams coordinator of Mississippi State. He is an Arlington Martin alum. He is a fellow Baylor Bear, and he is someone that I consider a very good friend. Thank you, Cliff. We appreciate it. Good luck to y'all, and Hail State.
Hey, I appreciate it, fellas. And once again, I can't wait to hop back on at a later time, man. What you guys are doing is so cool. And I appreciate too, because your perspective, I can't wait to see this thing grow and this podcast grow, because it's you guys are a voice for a lot of young coaches. Because remember, for us, as we're all coming up and the different paths of our coaching career, we didn't have anything to look to. It was all these crazy stories you heard from guys, right? Well, you guys have have now stories to share, and you have a voice, and people can sit there and see and watch it. So I can't wait to see where this thing grows, man. And there's going to be a lot of young coaches that you guys are going to speak to that you probably won't ever meet or know about. And these conversations that you guys are having are going to be transformative to their careers, man. So any chance I can be a part of it, I would love to, man. So I wish you guys the absolute best. I'm a phone call or text away, man. Always.
Thank you, brother.